Hello everyone and welcome to my UDK tutorial series. In this particular episode I'm going to be going over level streaming, which, just so everybody's on the same page, is essentially level loading. It's like the management of various parts of your game and the way that they all load in together. So if we take something like Borderlands or Assassin's Creed or Skyrim or something like that, some like really large open world RPG or MMO or something, and you kind of basic knowledge of the game would tell you, or really basic knowledge of playing video games would tell you that not the entire world is going to be loaded at any given time. And if you fast travel to somewhere, if you have a fast travel ability, then it'll take a minute for it to load. It's not like an instant teleport. It takes a little bit, and then you arrive. However, if you were to travel there normally, then it doesn't take that moment to load whenever you get to that same spot, because it's slowly loading as you travel along, and it loads within a certain distance. So that's sort of what level streaming is. It's that optimization of not having the entire thing loaded, because if you were to load an entire map like that at the same time, your computer would just set itself on fire and plead for mercy and want to be unplugged and never turn back on, because it would just be terrible. But anyway, so that's essentially what level streaming is. It'll make more sense as we go through this. I just kind of wanted to give a basic overview of what it is going into this, so people could kind of follow along easier, and the title can sometimes be confusing. So anyway, to get started with this, first of all, I wanted to go ahead and choose the night scene. It doesn't really matter what scene you choose, but I just wanted to choose the night scene because I've always been using midday, and heck, why not? Let's use night. It's when I record most of these anyway. So if you want to create a new level within, and have multiple levels linked, you don't go to File and click New Level. You don't go here, right? That's not what you do, because that's essentially going to be creating, quote-unquote, a new project. It's not really what's happening, but as far as the engine's concerned, it's not linking the levels together. Just doing that is just going to create an actual new level file separate from the other one, and they're not linked in any way. You could link them. You could technically create a bunch of different level files and then link them later, but it's kind of inefficient. So what you're going to want to do is open up the content browser. And I've already got it up. You'll be in this. You just need to go over to the Levels tab. And I kind of glossed over this in some of my previous tutorials. Essentially, this is your level management screen. This is everything you're going to need to know to mess around with your levels. It doesn't look like much, but as we start adding stuff, it fills up a little bit more. And it's not really complicated at all. There's just very few options. Most of this stuff, of course, is going to be editing the actual levels themselves, but this is going to be a very important screen if you're going to have at least more than one level. So right now we can see we have a persistent level. I'll talk more about exactly what that is possibly later on, if I can remember to. But it shows us how many actors we currently have in there. It tells us that that's the currently selected level, which means that it's very important to keep track of which level's the current level. And again, I'll show this as we continue. But it can be very easy to kind of forget, and I've actually done it myself, messing around with it, which level is currently selected. So you'll be editing something in the wrong level, and then you realize that you got to move that to a different level, and it can kind of get confusing. So it's very important to remember which one is the current level. There are easier ways, to see, but we'll get to that. So we have a toggle visibility, right? We can just turn that on and off, and we can open the Kismet thing. We can open up Kismet sequences with this. It's very important to note also that each level has its own Kismet sequence, which means that if I were to add a trigger into this right now, and I were to create a new level, I could not access that trigger in the new level's Kismet sequences. All Kismet sequences in each level are completely separate from each other. Now, you can have Kismet sequences be fired upon levels themselves being loaded, but you can't access meshes and actors and triggers and stuff from other levels in different levels. The only thing you can do is just interaction between how they're loaded. and then fire off Kismet sequences from that. Okay, so that's another thing. But then we can have a save button that we have over here, and there's two more things that I'll explain once we actually create a level. But the first step is actually doing that. We need to create one. So if we go up here to this little corner, we have the level button. There's a couple different options. Most of them are pretty simple. New level. We can actually select a bunch of actors and create a new level, and it'll automatically import all of those actors with their respective orientations into the new level in just those. So it's sort of like starting from scratch completely, or starting from scratch with a couple selected actors, or you could just add an entire level that's existing already in there, which I will do just for example purposes. VCTF Necropolis, and we'll just click OK. And it's in here. So we can see it's 6,124 actors. We've got this little blue bar, and we've got a lock button. This blue thing here, I'll show in just a second what that does, but essentially it allows us to change the color for editing purposes, so we can kind of keep track of which level we're looking at. And then the lock button, if we were to make this to current level just by double clicking on it, or you can right click and make current, but we make it current and we can edit it, this level pretty much. If we click the lock button, it's going to boot us out of that being the current level, and we're not going to be able to select it as the current level. If I double clicked on it now, it gives us this. So it essentially allows you to prevent yourself from making accidental changes, or the better use for it, because a lot of the time you think, well, I'm not going to be that dumb. I'm not going to make start deleting stuff, and sure, it's kind of useful, but if I need to make changes, then it's kind of annoying to have to go back and undo that. I don't see why that's a feature. It's more used for when you're working on servers, because UDK, it requires a bunch of programs to be installed and lots of tweaking and all kinds of things like that. It's complicated. But UDK can be set up so you can work with multiple developers at the same time. So you have a map, you have a project being stored on a server, and whoever's like the administrator over the project can lock various levels once they're done, and no one can then change them. So that's sort of the more useful feature and aspect of that. I just kind of wanted to throw that out there to mention that levels in this fashion are not only useful in just saying, okay, we have a forest level over here and a plains level over here. They're very, very useful when you're working with multiple people, because different people can be working on different things. They don't necessarily have to be working on completely different themes. You could all have people working on just one house, but one person's working on lighting and another person's working on something else in a different level, and you have all these levels together, and you can just merge them. There's a merge option in here. So you can just select different levels and you can merge levels together once they're done, assuming that there's no issues with meshes colliding into each other, which it should give you errors. I haven't tested that yet, but it'll give you some sort of error. You'll be able to tell if a bunch of meshes are colliding together, but you can just merge them together and it works fine. You end up having to do that to a degree, sort of, anyway, whenever you finish your game, because you don't hand a person with like a bajillion different files. Sort of, but as far as the levels are concerned, they're usually just a couple files, all combined into one big file that the kind of reads from, sort of. I won't get into the exact specifics of how all that works, but anyway, so we can now see we've got the VCTF Necropolis, and we've got some wonkiness going on with the floor here, because we essentially added this right on top of our other level. So they're being merged together right now. We can see a night sky, but we can also see the other sky dome that we have here too. So I just dropped them right into each other together, and it essentially worked. So that's kind of the answer, whether or not that was going to work or not. And if we were to click the visibility, we would see just Necropolis. Now we can see just that one, and then we can change the visibility to just the persistent level. So that's sort of how that works. You can change the visibility between the two. Very useful, of course, if you're working on, if I wanted to work on just Necropolis, it would be helpful if I unlocked it. Then I could change the visibility so I can't even see anything from the other level. I can't interact with it or anything. That way, I know I'm not going to accidentally be working in the wrong level, so I just make that one my current one. And again, if you're working with multiple developers, they're not going to see you changing the visibilities. That's going to be sort of client side, where you're just changing visibility so you can see this one, and somebody else may be just seeing another thing. And that way, you might not be accidentally changing each other's stuff. So, anyway, so this I was going to talk about this. Essentially, the color of these doesn't matter. It's more of just, like I said earlier, for editing purposes. Because if we go to this little button here on the viewport, there's actually multiple of them depending on which viewport you're in. You can see, and there's one for each one, right? So let me there. So if you click this and you go down to show advanced, and then down here to level coloration right here. If I hit that, it's going to color everything in this blue. Okay? Now it's blue because that's the color I selected. If I changed it to like green, now it's green. And if I had more than one level, it would color various things. If I had everything visible, it would color each thing that's from a different level in a different color. So you can sort of see which objects are part of which levels on a large scale. If you're just kind of flying through your game world, you can see which things are where. And if it's good for analyzing whether or not something has been misplaced accidentally, because it's very easy to just accidentally place an object in the wrong level. So you can kind of use this to diagnose, which objects are in the wrong places. Now the persistent level doesn't have a color. If I were to bring that back in, let's see. Yeah, so the persistent level doesn't have a color, which in a way is its own color because everything looks normal. So it's easy to tell what's part of the persistent level because this is not actually colored. So that's basically how all that works, right? So I'm just gonna hide this right now, and there. Now what I'm going to do is create a new level, and one thing I didn't actually discuss is, let me just give this a temporary name. Okay, the Kismet, the streaming method. I forgot to mention that. The streaming method is essentially how it's going to be loaded into your game. If you use Kismet, you can pretty much do everything that the other two do. The other two being always loaded and distance. But it takes some Kismet work to set up. If you want to use always loaded, it's fairly easy to set up. If you want to use the distance, it's a little tricky to set up in Kismet, but it can technically be done, I believe. So if really, it's best to use Kismet because always loaded is obviously it's always going to be loaded all the time, no matter what. And if you want to change that, you would have to delete the level and then just make a new one. So 90% of the time, it's best to go with Kismet. The distance is just going to load based off of like a sphere, which the actual dimensions of the sphere are changeable in the world options. But I'm not going to go show you that because it loads, if you're in the sphere, a level is loaded. If you're outside of the sphere, a level is not loaded. But that can also be tricky to use because, if you're in a room, let's just say that your entire level takes place in like a large facility. There's plenty of games that have had that happen. If you're loading a part of the facility, not all rooms are spherical. So if you go to the corner of a room, the level might not load because you're in the corner. But if you go to the center, the level might load because, it's a sphere. And you can't just really extend the sphere further out so it covers the corners, because now it's extending beyond the wall, and you could walk into the next room and still technically be inside the sphere because you're in the center of it. So hopefully that makes sense of why the sphere's weird. But Kismet can do both of those, so it's usually best to just use the Kismet loading. But the other two are there if you want to use them. So anyway, that's the streaming method. Let me just gonna create a new level real quick. And what I'm going to do is make it current, and I know that you saw it before, but make sure that you understand that you can see everything else that's in every other level that you have currently visible, even if it's not your current level. Right now I have the temporary level that I made. This temporary level only has one actor. See, it's just got the builder brush, that's it. But the other persistent level has 8, so it's this. Now, obviously, the only thing that we're seeing right now is the persistent level, but if I were to take, and I can select this because it's visible in the persistent level, and if I were to hold Alt and copy this over, we can see it, no big deal, right? If I disable the current level, it's no longer there. But if I enable this, now we can see it. Right? Because what's happened is we can see all of the other stuff in every other level, and we can just copy stuff into the current level. Whenever it says current level, that's what we're adding to. So that's why I said it can kind of become difficult at times to tell what levels are which, because looking at this right now, you wouldn't really know unless you looked at the number of actors. There would be no way to tell which cube is from which level, unless we had level coloration on. But it's also really handy because you can just copy stuff straight from one level to another without having to go to the content browser and drag it in, or, set certain light settings. Like if I wanted to copy the same light settings, all I have to do is just drag this light over here, and now we've got light in this level. It's not been properly done with the light mask, but I've got it in lit mode and it's working, right? If I deleted the light, okay. For some reason, okay, I guess it's being weird because I haven't reloaded the lighting, but anyway, I just copied the light directly over, right? Sky Dome, I could copy that, and bam, now we got a Sky Dome, right? So that's sort of how that works. Now, obviously, while technically, as long as we don't have the persistent level and the temp level loaded at the same time, this weird texture flickering isn't going to occur, because technically right now, because both of them are loaded, as far as the editor is concerned, because it's showing us both of them, so they're technically loaded. But they're occupying the same space, and so it's the texture flickering that's occurring right now. However, this can sort of be a problem because the persistent level is always going to be loaded all the time. So if you want to have stuff in the persistent level and also stuff in the extra levels too, you're going to need to make sure that they're not occupying the same spot. So stuff like sky domes, lights that are going to be dominant lights that are going to be acting sort of as like suns, are going to need to be in the persistent level, and everything else you can add to the other levels, so that you can keep the persistent level always loaded. For instance, like the lighting that's global lighting, maybe terrain. Well, not terrain, that wouldn't work because you'd have to load different parts of terrain. But sky domes, stuff like that, you could have in the persistent level. Everything else would have to be loaded in because you don't want to overwrite sections of the persistent level. And I mean, you could have the persistent level have stuff in it. You would just have to make sure that your other levels don't intersect where that is. So just keep that in mind. So, alright. Now, if I go into Kismet, basically the only other thing to discuss at this point is sort of making them actually work where they're loading in and out, because the only thing we've been doing at this point is just kind of moving things back and forth. But we're not going to see any of this if we go in here. Yeah, it's got to load it. Or save it, rather. It's taking it a while because it's having to save all of these things together. But if we jump in here, we're not going to see anything but just the persistent level, because we don't have any Kismet work dictating that when it needs to load in all of these other things. They're just kind of chilling out there, unloaded at the moment. So we'll have to create a Kismet sequence to load those in. But we can use triggers and stuff because we set it to be Kismet based. Now again, you could use always loaded or levels or the distance loading methods too. But again, Kismet is the best method. This is taking forever. Okay. I'll just restart UDK. I'd stop my recording, but if I do, it's going to not work correctly. So let me just bring it right back up real quick. And I'll just have to I'll delete the VCTF Necropolis thing. Oh, okay, never mind. It wasn't saved, so it's no big deal. Okay, that's fine. Let's just do new level. Yes, this one. Okay, so let me just, real quick, I'm going to drag 2 cubes. Center cube's in the persistent level, the other 2 cubes are in the other level. Okay? So, if I open up the Kismet sequence of the persistent level. Okay, we're in the Kismet sequence of the persistent level. Okay. I'm going to make a trigger real quick. And triggers are usually, or volumes, not necessarily triggers, but volumes would be a good way of having the player load a section of the world. Whenever they get within that volume, load that section of the world. And you can have more than one level loaded at a time too. It's all about optimization and only having so many loaded at a certain time. But let me see. Let's just make this like 150 by like 300. And let me drag it up a little bit. And I want to put it right in the center of this this cube in here. So whenever you're inside this volume, I want to have the other level be loaded in, and it'll load these 2 cubes. Now this is really not the best example, because obviously you wouldn't want to load something that's right near the player. That would kind of defeat the whole purpose of loading, because you could have just had them right there anyway. But it's at least an example. So touch, and what we're going to get is new action. Where is it? Level stream. You could do stream level or stream levels. I'm just going to use stream levels because you can just use one level. So touched, load, and there's a load and an unload. So you can use both. So for instance, if you have a trigger volume or just a trigger, while the person is inside the level or that volume, have it load. While they're outside, unload it. Pretty simple. And then again, once it's finished, you can have it go to something else. So you can sort of use these, using these in conjunction with the where is it? Level loaded things. So this is something that's going to fire once a level's been fully loaded. So I would do this here, and then in my other level I could do a level loaded. So this loads the level. Once the level's loaded, I could do something. Now there's a big difference between loaded and visible and beginning of level, because once this has actually been fired to, okay, you need to start loading, the beginning of level will fire as soon as it starts loading. Loaded and visible is going to wait until everything is visible to the player and it's fully loaded into memory. So there's a big difference between the two. Now if you were to just test it right now without a lot of stuff in there, you wouldn't notice the difference. But if you have like thousands and thousands of actors in there, where it's having to load a lot of different things in, you're going to notice the difference between reaction time. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, that's that. Okay, so what you're going to want to do, let me full screen this, is select the stream levels thing, and there's a levels option down here. Click the little green button, open this up, and you have a level name. Just type the name of the level that it is that you're wanting to load. That of course would be gotten because you set that whenever you create a new level, or if you added another level file, you would just type that name in. And you can, because I use stream levels plural instead of just one stream level, you can put multiple of them in here. So I could type 1, I could hit the green check mark or the green plus button again, type another one, and just to have multiple of them being loaded from one trigger, or multiple of them being unloaded from one trigger. And we have an unload all other levels. So this would ensure that only the persistent level and the currently being loaded level that is selected with this one. So if I were to type in temp, right, it's got to give me a check mark, it would unload every other level except for temp. So this would be sort of the ideal type thing. You don't necessarily have to have only 2 levels being loaded, one being the persistent level and one being the level you're trying to load. You could have more than one, but this is just a good way of sort of minimizing all of them in a simple way. There are circumstances where you may need to have multiple levels loaded. If I may use Minecraft as an example, the way that Minecraft works, so that like the entire game, the entire possible surface area isn't being loaded at the same time, which would most assuredly cause your computer to set fire to itself very rapidly. It loads in chunks, so 16 by 16 by 16 areas. You could do something similar where you're loading in certain sizes of areas, but you can have more than one quote-unquote chunk open at a time. However, you could also have only one chunk. So that's just for you to make the decision of how you want to do it, but there is an option for that. Now there's a difference between unloading and hiding. You can sort of, like let's take an example of a player fighting a boss battle. And after this boss battle, they're going to go to another section of the map. Like, for instance, they're fighting some rock monster. When the rock monster dies, some part of the mountain opens up, right, and allows them to go inside the mountain. That mountain would be a new level. Well, while they're fighting the boss, you could be sort of in the background slowly loading that mountain level in preparation. But you keep it hidden. So whenever they kill this rock monster, they don't have to have a loading screen. Essentially, it's already been loaded the entire time that they were fighting. You don't want to load it quickly because that's the entire point of the loading screen, so it can just load it quickly because it would cause it to lag. So you just load it slowly over that time period, and then you hide it. So it's there in memory waiting. And then you just unhide it when you need to go, and they can just walk right in without any loading. But just keep in mind that if it's hidden, it's still using memory. Basically, it's like everything's there. It's just that the player can't see it. But everything is there, animations are running, and it's just waiting for the signal to show itself, and everything will be running and ready. So you don't need to use that too often, except in the circumstances of where you don't want to have the player be waiting on the level to load. You just only want to use it where you want something to be sitting there ready. So that's the difference there. Let's see, make visible after load. Again, whether or not you want it to automatically become visible. You may not. Should block on load, targets, let's see. So you know, not very much. I believe these two, yeah, these two are usually there. Or not. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure, what sequence action is for. But anyway, not a lot of options here to mess around with, really. But I'm going to set this up just like this. That's all I'm going to have to do to have these two levels load like I want them to. Then I hit the play button. And, okay, pay very close attention, because we don't have the other two things right now. As soon as I walk inside of here, there's one, there's two. Now notice, I'm going to walk back out again. Uh-oh, I didn't set the trigger count. It's set to 1. One other thing, the lighting needs to be rebuilt thing is gray right now. It's gray because in the what's it called? The presets where you have the different lighting samples, they've already been centrally built. They're fully ready to go. The lighting's been built and everything. It's going to give you, it's going to be gray like that. I think usually for whatever reason, but as soon as we step in here and it brings two new objects in here, these two new objects being something that we haven't built the lighting for yet, it's going to turn to red because it notices that they're in here now. So you can see that. And they just kind of pop in here, and the lighting's again terrible because it hasn't calculated these being here. Now, that's of course one thing that you're going to have to consider whenever you're loading and unloading new levels. The lighting's going to change. Now, the player may not see it, but you're going to have to sort of deal with the way that the lighting is going, because the way that UDK works is it hard bakes the way that the light bounces all of these off of all these static objects together. And anytime a dynamic object is moving and you have it processing lighting, it's having to constantly calculate the lighting changes for that object, but everything else is just hard baked in there, so it's not having to calculate the lighting on the fly. Because if you've ever ran the lighting on a large project, you know it takes a long time. You don't want to have to be doing that in the middle of a firefight. So you'll have to kind of consider the way that your levels are popping into existence, and you'll have to kind of bake all of the lighting in for all of those ahead of time. But if I walk outside of this, it unloads them immediately, loads them in. Okay, they're fully fledged objects. Let me actually make this a little bigger so I can reach them. If I do 500, they are fully fledged objects. They're not like ghost objects. So I can't run. I'm pressing the forward button, back button. I can't go through them. Okay, but you know, they just unload once I get out of a certain radius. So that's sort of essentially how that works, and the way that the level streaming works. It's a very simplistic example again, but you just amp that up on a larger scale and you've essentially got your level streaming the way it should be working. And let's do this. Let me bring this back up. We can merge levels. I mentioned this earlier. So if I wanted to just put these two together, I can name this temp 2, and there we go. So we have a new persistent level, and they're all in here, right? Now, of course, it's got to rebuild the lighting. But see, now, if we walk inside of this thing, that trigger's still there, but it's not able to find that streaming level because it's not there anymore, right? So if we open up the Kismet sequence, it can't find that level. So it's just giving us that error. But it still worked. We can just delete those, and the trigger can just sit there. But that's essentially, we just merged them together. No problems, nothing. It just merges easily. You just have to put it into a new file. You'll need to, I can now delete that old file that I had, but you don't want to overwrite, like you don't want to have the name be something like, the name of your project, and then, you have like, the name of your project lights, name of your project meshes, name of your project cinematics, and then have, when you merge it, just do the name of your project, because that'll be overwriting an already present file. You'll just have to name it something. You can rename it later, but it has to take all of those files and copy them together and then write it into a new one. So you can't overwrite files that you're trying to copy. Common sense, but just wanted to say that. So that's the basics of level streaming. Hopefully everything has made sense. I did my very best to make sure that everything did make sense. So if there's any questions or anything you think I did not discuss very well, let me know. I'll be happy to try even re-recording the video if you just point out what it is that I did wrong. Oh, one other thing. If we have multiple levels, let me just overwrite that real quick. So if I have, let me make this the current level. I'm going to hit F4 on the static mesh. I am fairly certain that you can move less stuff between levels if you have a problem with them. Let's see. Oh. Yes. I was looking at the thing on the other menu. Let's see. At a information open that was telling me this. Let's see. There's a way to like move. Oops, I'm sorry. There's a way to move actors into certain levels if you put them in the wrong place. So it's yeah. So now there it is, and we've removed it from that one and we moved it into the other one. So there are ways. You just need to right click on the level, and whatever actors you have selected, you can just move them directly into the level that you want. So that's sort of how that works. But anyway, again, if there's any problems with anything, just let me know. I can try and change it. If you have any questions, that's fine. All good stuff like that. And thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in another video.